Arthur arrived at the training grounds, unsure of what to expect. His request for sparring partners had been so last minute that he half expected a couple of soldiers from the castle to show up. Instead, he was greeted by a surprisingly imposing scene. 3 elders who exuded power, Cathlon, and a smug-looking Virion waiting for him. Virion, always brimming with enthusiasm, sprang up and grabbed the box from Arthur's hands, placing it down before dragging him toward the group. "Arthur, meet everyone," he declared, with the excitement of someone introducing a child to a surprise party. From the sidelines, Emily waved Arthur off like a mother sending her child to war, a gesture that didn't help ease the tension brewing in his chest. Virion began the introductions. First, Cathlon, the princess of the royal Glader house, who was standing quietly beside her guardian, Hester Flamesworth. The elderly woman had her gray hair tightly pulled back into a bun, her demeanor calm and formal. Arthur's ears perked at the mention of her surname. "Flamesworth?" he echoed, caught off guard. "Yes," Hester replied with a trace of pride. "Familiar with the name, are we?" Arthur nodded, though he didn't dive into details. He quickly turned his attention back to Cathlon, raising an eyebrow. "What brings you here?" Before Cathlon could respond, Hester stepped in. Princess Cathlon is an accomplished ice affinity conjurer, dark yellow core stage. I was assigned to keep her safe, and since Commander Virion thought it'd be beneficial, we're here to assist in your training. Cathlon nodded, shyly adding, "There's not much else to do outside my training with Master Vare, so I thought I could help." From behind, a gruff voice chimed in. "Princess and a knight, how traditional." The dwarf seated on a raised stone pillar smirked, scratching his nose. This wasn't any ordinary dwarf, though. His size, paired with a sheer mass of muscle, made Arthur wince. The dwarf introduced himself as Bundamog Lonuid, or simply Bund, and followed it up with a handshake that felt more like a test of strength. Arthur met the challenge, gripping back with all the force his body could muster. A hint of approval flickered in Bund's eyes. "Not bad," he muttered before letting go. "See? I told you the kid's not just a pretty face," Virion teased. Bund rolled his eyes, but couldn't suppress a chuckle. "This one's been a close friend for years," Virion continued. "Don't let his looks fool you. He's a genius with earth affinity magic." "What's wrong with my looks?" Bund protested, puffing out his chest. "I'm still quite the ladies' man back home." Virion dismissed him with a wave. "Sure you are. Now, stop being dramatic." Arthur chuckled internally at their banter, but his sharp gaze analyzed Bund closely. Despite Virion's reassurance, Arthur couldn't ignore the tension he felt toward dwarves after recent betrayals. His thoughts were interrupted by the loudest yawn he'd ever heard. "Ah, right," Virion said, introducing the final member of the group. "Arthur, this is—" "No need," the elf interrupted, cutting Virion off mid-sentence. "The boy doesn't need to know anything beyond my name, Camus Celeridon. I'm here to spar, not socialize." Arthur held his tongue, shocked by Camus's dismissive tone toward Virion, the leader of the continent's military. The elf looked disheveled, his silvery blonde hair covering most of his face, and his clothes reeked of neglect. Yet the sharp aura around him hinted at an unmatched level of power. Virion, seemingly unbothered, excused himself. "Well, I'll leave you all to it. I've got mountains of paperwork calling my name." With that, he departed, looking more drained than usual. As silence fell over the group, Arthur took a moment to examine the training room. It was nothing extravagant, just a large dirt field surrounded by mana-reinforced walls. A small pond sat in one corner, and aside from the metal door on the far wall, it was simply a place to train. His attention was drawn back by Emily's enthusiastic wave from the other side of the room. "I finished setting up most of it. There's a lot I want to show you before you start," she called, wiping sweat from her forehead. Arthur couldn't help but grin. Whatever was about to unfold, it was shaping up to be anything but ordinary. The training setup was unlike anything Arthur had ever seen before. The equipment Emily had revealed from the giant wooden box looked oddly familiar, yet out of place. A large metal panel, covered in gauges and knobs, stretched about the length of his arm span. It resembled some kind of ancient control panel from a ship in his previous life, though the glowing crystals embedded on each side added a fantastical twist. Attached to the panel were a series of wires that led to the walls of the training room, ending at large metal discs embedded in the walls. Arthur had overlooked them earlier, but now it was clear they weren't part of the room's original design. Their purpose, however, was still a mystery. Emily didn't stop there. She excitedly dove back into the box, resurfacing with a set of strange leather armor. The pieces were connected by wires, with a blue crystal embedded in the breastplate's center, right over where the wearer's mana core would sit. Without hesitation, Emily passed the armor to Alanis, who began strapping it onto Arthur. The getup was far from flattering. Arthur stood there, dressed in what looked like a wired patchwork of leather, feeling like a test subject in some bizarre experiment. Perfect, Emily beamed, adjusting the armor with pride. Arthur's lack of enthusiasm wasn't lost on her. Trust me, General, this will help with your training. Before Arthur could question further, the elders chimed in. Bund, ever the skeptic, leaned forward. So, what's the deal with all these fancy toys? Emily adjusted her glasses and explained, Arthur is a quadra-elemental mage, an anomaly on this continent. While he's progressed remarkably, he's started to plateau in his elemental magic usage. This apparatus will help him break through those limits. Kathleen added, but didn't he train with the Asuras? Arthur nodded. That was more focused on close combat techniques. Emily's right. I've been relying too heavily on ice and lightning lately. This training is a chance to refine my control over all 4 elements. The explanation drew a mix of reactions. Bund groaned at the mere thought of mastering multiple elements, while Hester smirked and teased him. Unlike you, General Arthur has the mental capacity for it. Bund shot back, indignant. My mental capacity is just fine, thank you very much. Emily interrupted their banter to focus on the task at hand. She asked the elders and Kathleen to infuse their mana into the crystal on the panel. Kamu, ever the silent one, stepped forward first. Without a word, he placed his hand on the crystal. A whirlwind erupted from his body, swirling protectively before condensing into his palm and transferring into the crystal. The panel buzzed to life, its gauges dancing wildly. Next was Hester. She calmly placed her hand on the crystal and muttered, "Burn." Flames erupted around her, making her seem like a figure of pure fire. Yet, when a tendril of flame brushed past Arthur, there was no heat. Her display was one of control, not raw power. Bund, of course, made his entrance dramatic. The ground shook, cracks forming beneath his feet as his earth affinity mana surged into the crystal. Emily muttered weak protests, but Bund ignored her, grinning like a child showing off a new toy. Finally, Kathleen stepped up. Her icy aura filled the room, frost-forming serpents that coiled around her arm before merging into the crystal. The apparatus glowed with a kaleidoscope of colors as Emily began flipping switches and turning knobs. With a loud click, the panel connected to the metal discs in the walls, creating a honeycomb-like network of mana strands. Now that's impressive, Bund muttered, craning his neck to take it all in. Emily, proud of her creation, gestured to Alanis. The elf performed a quick scan of Arthur, her eyes turning silver and her aura shimmering emerald. Once finished, she stepped back, leaving Arthur with more questions than answers. Emily waved them off. All will be explained later. For now, it's time to train. The elders and Kathleen took their positions around the room, surrounding Arthur. The princess stood near the pond, with Bund and Camus flanking her. Arthur's mind raced as he tried to decide who to face first. Adrenaline surged through his body, mingling with the mana that flowed through his veins. The weight of their combined presence pressed down on him, sending chills through his spine. But instead of fear, Arthur felt a grin spread across his face. He lowered himself into a defensive stance, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Let's begin," he said, his voice steady, his spirit unwavering. The moment Arthur's words left his mouth, the elders wasted no time in launching their attack. Hester moved first, conjuring a blazing globe of fire in her palm. With a quick flick of her wrist, the fiery sphere shot toward him, growing larger as it closed the distance. Just as Arthur prepared to counter, the ground beneath him shifted abruptly, throwing him off balance. He barely had time to react, but with a swift movement, he drew Dawn's ballad from his ring. A shockwave of frost burst forth from his blade, colliding with the flaming sphere and causing it to explode prematurely. Arthur stumbled back, muttering under his breath. "Tripping over your own feet, young general?" Bund snickered. his hands glowing with a golden aura. For someone with so many muscles, you sure rely on cheap parlor tricks, Arthur shot back, pushing himself up from the ground. The dwarf shrugged. I'm not the one who just fell on my arse. Arthur smirked, but kept a wary eye on the other two elders. He didn't have to wait long. Camus, ever the graceful combatant, casually hurled a blade of wind his way. The crescent-shaped attack sliced through the air with alarming speed, carving a path in the ground as it approached. Arthur swung Dawn's ballad to intercept the wind blade, but it distorted unexpectedly before detonating in an explosive burst. Camus grinned. Lesson 1 of fighting as a conjurer: be unpredictable. A powerful blast of wind nearly sent Arthur sprawling again. This time, however, he was ready. He stabbed his sword into the ground with enough force to anchor himself against the gale. Looking up, he barely had time to register the jagged icicles hurtling toward him. Summoning mana from his core, Arthur unleashed a wave of fire with a swift motion of his free arm. The ice shards evaporated with a sharp hiss, but before he could capitalize on his success, 3 stone panels shot up around him, trapping him inside a makeshift pyramid. Great, this is getting annoying, Arthur muttered to himself, igniting a small flame to assess his surroundings. The walls converged at a point about 20 feet above him. Might as well fight like a conjurer too, he mused, slipping Dawn's ballad back into his ring. Arthur sent a current of earth mana into the ground, feeling out the positions of his opponents. He could sense all 4 elders, along with 2 distant figures, Emily and Alanis, most likely observing. But Bund must have sensed his probing because the walls around him began sprouting stone spikes, inching closer with menacing precision. Crafty dwarf, Arthur smirked. The spikes closed in. It was now or never. Arthur expanded the flame he had conjured and released a wave of frost with his other hand. Clasping the opposing elements together, he generated a thick cloud of steam, as filling the enclosure until it began seeping through the cracks. Steam's leaking out. Careful for a surprise attack, Hester's voice echoed from outside. Princess, take advantage of the moisture in the air, she instructed. Oh crap, Arthur muttered, realizing his mistake. Lightning surged around his body, coiling and crackling as the temperature inside plummeted. Floating shards of ice began to form, but Arthur's spell was ready. Burst, he hissed, releasing tendrils of electricity in all directions. The lightning shattered the stone pyramid, sending dust, debris, and steam billowing into the air. Through the haze, Arthur spotted Camus, now only a few feet away, wind swirling menacingly around his arms. Without a word, the elder unleashed a powerful gust, sending Arthur hurtling backward, straight into Hester. The fire conjurer was ready, a sphere of blue flames hovering in her palm. With no time to fully react, Arthur twisted in midair and braced himself as the sapphire flames engulfed him. Kathleen Glader watched in alarm. Hester Flamesworth had served her family for over 2 decades, and while her magical abilities were formidable, they came with a fair share of pride. Seeing Arthur swallowed by those iconic flames, Kathleen knew Hester viewed him as a challenge to overcome. Her hand instinctively reached out, but before she could act, the swirling flames split apart, revealing Arthur, relatively unscathed aside from a few singed strands of hair. He let out a small cough. That was a close one. Hester's eyes widened momentarily before she composed herself. Impressive, General Arthur, but you seem to be taking us a little too lightly. Bund crossed his bulky arms. I second that. If this is all you can do, we might need more than 2 months to train you. Elder Camus yawned and plopped down onto the ground. It's hard to stay motivated when you're holding back so much. Arthur laughed. Sorry, I have a habit of matching my opponents to get a feel for them. Bad habit of mine. Then, without warning, a wave of mana surged from Arthur like a dam breaking. The force sent shivers down Kathleen's spine. Camus was back on his feet, alert and serious, while Hester and Bund thickened their auras in preparation. Arthur dusted himself off, a confident grin spreading across his face. Shall we start for real now? Arthur stood in the center, his form now transformed. His long hair shimmered like liquid pearl, golden symbols cascading down his arms. If his presence had been strong before, now it was downright overwhelming. I won't use this form for the remainder of our training, he said, his back facing the group. But since today's sparring is just to get acquainted, I'll graciously let loose. The crude leather armor that Emily had given him now seemed almost majestic, with a vivid nimbus of mana enveloping him. When he turned around, those amethyst eyes could only be described with words that didn't seem enough. Ethereal, illustrious, sovereign. They shook everyone to their core. Elder Bundamog, usually so confident, exclaimed, "Now that's more like it," though his voice trembled slightly. Hester's voice rang out, "Spread out!" She leaped backward, preparing her spell. Everyone knew the tables had turned. The numbers advantage no longer mattered. Arthur's presence thickened like a shroud, and doubt crept in. Kathleen berated herself, biting her lip. She had always been told she was talented, yet doubt never ceased. Even now, Arthur's confident smile from their first meeting echoed in her mind. Arthur turned to face her, as if sensing her hesitation. He gave a faint smile and nodded. In a blink, he vanished, leaving only a footprint and tendrils of electricity behind. Before anyone could react, Elder Camus was sent flying, cushioned by the earth below. Black lightning coiled around Arthur as he scanned for his next target. The ground rose, anchoring him in place. "Stop gawking and help," Kathleen thought, using the nearby pond to form a giant frozen spear. Elder Camus amplified it with wind magic, sending it hurtling toward Arthur. Just as it was about to hit, the spell dispersed, leaving Arthur untouched but slightly pushed back. Elder Bundamog grunted, raising a giant boulder. "Show me more, unless changing your hair color is all you can do." Arthur grinned wickedly. "Gladly." He became a blur, sending a shockwave at Bundamog, who blocked with a stone shield. But Arthur had already targeted Hester with black lightning. Kathleen braced herself, summoning frost armor. Seraph of Snow. Frost covered her body, turning into icy armor. She dashed toward Arthur, ice blade in hand. Her strike cut across his back, drawing blood that froze instantly. Arthur turned, surprised, and sent a wind blade, but the frost armor absorbed it. With Arthur pushed back into Elder Bundamog, the dwarf saw his chance. With a flaming rock fist, he struck Arthur with a satisfying crash. Arthur groaned from the crater he now occupied. "You got me good there," Bundamog laughed. "The princess saved the day." Arthur admitted he was running out of steam. "I wasn't expecting you to come at me like an ice ninja, Kathleen." Kathleen tilted her head. "Ice? Ninja?" Arthur chuckled awkwardly. "Never mind." The group gathered at the entrance of the training room. Emily Watskin and Miss Ameria awaited. "Before we analyze today's assessment," Emily said, "any feedback?" Hester spoke up. "The biggest concern is safety." Emily nodded. "I'm working on something for that, but it needs tweaking." Arthur asked, "What is it?" "A device that reads incoming mana and triggers a defense mechanism," Emily explained. Bundamog mused. "Couldn't this be used in battle?" Miss Ameria interjected. "It would be expensive and only work once." Emily revealed the rare phoenix worm scales needed for the artifact, supplied by the Glader family. Arthur examined his armor. "What's this getup for?" Emily grinned. "To record and measure how you magic the hell out of people."